James Jones was not an easy kid, that's for sure. His teachers had to have had nightmares about him. His school performance was absolutely dismal. He skipped school all the time. When he did show up for school, he was late. He had severe behavior issues. And when he was in school, he continually used bad language in the classroom. He never followed directions. He ran around the room in a berserk manner. He became hostile when he was rebuked. He threw objects in the classroom, and he bullied classmates. One time he hit a teacher. And the thing is, James admitted to all of that. If I were a teacher, I would pray James wouldn't show up for school that day. So who is James, and what's his story? Let's start with James's parents, shall we? His mother described her married life with James's dad as hectic, and that his dad smoked reefers, dealt drugs, and he was involved in several robberies and was in and out of prison all the time. At one time, James's dad was an inmate at a mental institution. His parents separated in 1952 when James was 8 years old. James's father continued a life of philandering, and he had several out-of-wedlock children with other women. On June 10, 1958, he killed a sheriff in Stanford, North Carolina, and he got a 20 to life for this. According to James, his father was nice to him and he gave him money. But his father also taught his son how to beat up other children, including his girlfriend's child. James's mother completely rejected him. She called him a lazy, no-good bum who was out to rival his father's criminal record and who she felt would be safer in jail. She said that James would drink to excess. He stayed out till 6 or 7 in the morning with a bunch of like-minded drunks and bums who he would bring home frequently. She kicked him out of the house because he wouldn't work and he stole from the home. After his mother kicked him out of the house, she found 15 wallets under his mattress, which was the loot from burglaries and robberies that he pulled. Now, James told a different story. He said that he had a job until 1959, but he lost his job, and then his stepfather dismantled his bed and put all the food in the house under lock and key. So he moved out and he lived with his sister for a few months. But she kicked him out for not working and stealing as well. From there, he went on to live in an empty building at 247 West 123rd Street, which had no lights or heat. He lived here until February 1961. That's the middle of the winter. But then he moved in with his godmother in Bushwick, Brooklyn, which is going to figure into the story a little later on. James showed delinquent traits at a very early age. His mother said it was hereditary factors on his father's side that caused this, even though she herself had a record, and one of those times it was for assault. Both James's mother, father, and sister all had conflicts with the law. But his mother was right. James did have problems. He barely worked. He had no plans for the future. Actually, he wanted to be a boxer or a general, or both. He hung out with a bad bunch of guys, and he spent his leisure time hanging out on the stoop with his friends in the area of West 123rd Street between 7th and 8th Avenues. That's in Manhattan. James himself had an out-of-wedlock child with no knowledge of the whereabouts of his own kid. James was fond of the bottle, and he would buy a bottle of whiskey, and he would drink it in hallways or on rooftops. He also gambled at cards and dice, and he would play high-stakes games. James called it killing time. James's nickname was Bro, or Brother, and he was a member of a Harlem social club called the Phenomenons. Now, they would meet at Christopher Attica Center at 253 West 123rd Street in Manhattan. However, the Phenomenons became a fighting gang and changed their name to the Persian Lords. Now, the reason they did this was because there was a gang from the east side called the Imperial Knights, and they entered Persian Lord territory to draft neighborhood girls into the Imperial Knights Debs. James also said that the reason the gang was started was to protect our own blood. James didn't have very good success with protecting his own blood. He had a stab wound in his chest that he got in 1960. Actually, he had several scars from stab wounds in the stomach, the left side of the back, and his legs. And my guess is all those stab wounds were from gang fights. James's idea of killing time included getting into a lot of trouble in the late 1950s. I'm going to list some of the instances, but I'm not going to list all of them. Here's the first one. July 21, 1958, he was arrested with 3 others for trying to steal plumbing fixtures. He was sent to a juvenile reformatory in August 1958. 2. He was paroled on May 1959, and he was on probation for a mere 9 days, during which time his mother complained that he smoked marijuana and he associated with undesirable companions, probably the Persian Lords. On July 29, 1960, he was involved in a smash and grab when he broke the window of a tailor shop and he stole $40 and 7 men's suits. On December 9, 1960, along with 2 others, he burglarized a grocery store. He got away, but the other 2 were caught. 3. On June 23, 1961, at 1 in the morning, a patrolman of the 28th Precinct in Harlem got a complaint from a woman who couldn't get into her house because a number of men were congregating and loitering around the hallway of her building. The patrolman tried to disperse the crowd and they moved, that is, everyone except for James. He told the officer he didn't have to listen to him and he refused to move. Then he struck the police officer several blows with his fist and he had to be subdued and taken into custody. James continued his reckless ways, and on August 11, 1961, him and 3 friends came up with the brilliant idea of robbing a subway station. You will recall that James was now living with his godmother at 1473 Bushwick Avenue, which just happened to be near the subway station that the boys planned on robbing. One of the young men was armed with a .45 caliber handgun and a 4-inch blade stashed in a sheath tucked into the small of his back. It was early in the morning, and they announced a stick-up to the clerk operating the subway change booth. They ordered him to the ground, and they stole $157.15 in change, 187 tokens, and $6 from the clerk's wallet. Although they got away with the change and the tokens, the police collared them the very next day. James admitted his involvement in the subway heist, and he also admitted other crimes and said that he was ashamed of my criminal activity in a way. Later, when he was asked why he did the stick-up, this is what he said. I needed money, but most of all, I didn't think about consequences at that time. Who thinks? When you're doing these things, you don't think. Later on, you start to think. When James was asked who was to blame for all of this, he had a big smile and he said, I blame myself. However, despite the fact he said he blamed himself for his criminal activity, he didn't show very much remorse. James was sentenced to a 5-year term to an upstate reformatory. He began his sentence in December 1961, and he was paroled in February 1965. Ironically, when he was in prison, he was an excellent all-around student, and he strived for the opportunity to get his high school equivalency exam. He was very proud of his academic competition and his scholastic achievements, but he still misbehaved on the inside, and he had several discipline infractions. His guidance supervisor noticed that James had a warped idea of what was right and wrong. James told him that he was basically a nice guy, in spite of his record. His guidance officer said that he strikes me as the kind of individual that could become a wise guy in the institution, doing just as he damned pleases, hoping that he can stay out of trouble. While James was incarcerated, he was asked about his long criminal record, and this is what he said. I'm fully aware that that was my way of life. I don't think at that time. I wanted to have fun, and I never thought it was time to stop. On the outside, I didn't use my mind because I didn't want to use it. I hung around with the wrong crowd, And this crowd had the same ideas as I, wanted to have a good time like I did. There was no stop at that time. Well, that's the end of James's story. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. And if you're brave, make a comment below. What kind of student were you in high school?